Pakistan is on the brink of collapse. Its economy is teetering. IMF has set tough conditions for a bailout, and all the government can do now is accept them and possibly face a political backlash. So let's begin with what has been happening so far. An International Monetary Fund delegation landed in Pakistan on Tuesday for last-ditch talks to revive a vital financial aid that has been stalled for months. They are holding talks to finalize a bailout of $7 billion. The Pakistani government presented a debt management plan to the visiting IMF delegation, but that plan was rejected by the IMF, who called it unrealistic. Instead, it asked Pakistan to cut down subsidies. What's more, the IMF has asked Pakistan to implement major changes. This includes increasing electricity tariffs by 12.5 rupees per unit. The idea behind this is to cut down on money given as subsidies. Now, these are changes that the Prime Minister of Pakistan says are beyond imagination.
कि IMF एज ए स्पीक IMF का डेलीगेशन इस्लामाबाद में बैठा है और वो यकीनन फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर और उनकी टीम को बहुत टफ टाइम दे रहा है. मैं इस वक्त इस मौके के ऊपर तफसील में नहीं जाऊंगा. सिर्फ इस बात पर इत्तेफाक करूंगा इस हवाले से कि हमारा जो इसको इकोनॉमिक जो चैलेंज है इट इज़ अनइमेजिनेबल, और हमारी जो IMF के साथ जो शराइत हमने अपने पूरी करनी है वो इट्स बियॉन्ड इमेजिनेशन, लेकिन मजबूरी उसको करना है हमने.
Remember, this is a country that is facing one of the biggest economic crises in a decade. Inflation is more than 27%, and foreign exchange reserves are down to $3.1 billion that can support imports for just 18 days. Inflation has risen to a 48-year high, leaving Pakistan citizens struggling to afford basic food items. Wheat costs about 150 Pakistani rupees per kg. One packet of bread costs 89 rupees. Power outages have become common, and there's a fear that people could run out of ghee and oil and other essentials. If the bailout isn't finalized, the economy could collapse. So what is the bigger lesson here? A nation's economy cannot be held hostage to political vagaries. Stops that make you popular as a government have to be seen for the damage they will eventually cause. It's a lesson Sri Lanka learned the hard way too. To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Michael Kugelman, South Asia Senior Associate at the Wilson Center, Robindra Sachdev, Economy and Foreign Policy Expert with us on the show, Suresh Goel, former diplomat with us, and Bharat Karnad, Strategic Affairs Expert, joins us too. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on Beyond the Headline. Michael, let me begin with your take. I mean, this is a crisis which has been brewing for a while. What is going to be the impact of cutting corners, cutting down subsidies, and implementing harsh or what seems like harsh policies so that the IMF gives them the money? It's going to be a tough time for Shehbaz Sharif's government, isn't it?
And as you know, I mean, Pakistan regularly experiences serious economic crises because of structural deficiencies within its economy. It's always importing expensive items, and it's always struggling with exports because it's so often dependent on one sole export, textiles, which can't compete with competitors in the world. But what makes this crisis so unusual is that you had a perfect storm of other factors, including the external shocks triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and of course the COVID issues. And then you've just had a really poor leadership that's been very wishy-washy and hasn't been able to make up its mind about what to do, when to go to the IMF, when not to. So yeah, it's a very tough situation for the government now. It finally appears to have decided that it has to do whatever is necessary to meet the conditions of the IMF. But this is a government that's very unpopular, to be quite frank. And elections theoretically are scheduled to happen later in the year, October or November. So that means that the government, knowing it's already unpopular, recognizes that if it hikes prices up more, if it engages in more austerity measures, that's going to make it even more unpopular. And we've already seen public sentiment, which has been quite opposed to this government. So, you know, the government's in a catch-22 right now, right? If it gives in to the IMF and does what needs to be done, it'll get more unpopular. But if it holds forth and doesn't do as much as it could do, and it puts Pakistan in danger of a default, if it doesn't get that IMF loan, then obviously things could be worse there. But even if Pakistan does avoid default, it's in a lot of trouble. It's going to have a long, hard road to try to emerge from this particularly severe crisis.
So, a structurally weak economy and, of course, the current global economic crisis where big nations have cracked has made it even tougher. Ravinder Sachdev, what do you see as the reason for this bout of economic crisis that we are seeing Pakistan witness? And how is this different from what they have suffered in the past?
Thank you so much. I'll kind of split into quick bullet points. Where to start? Do you know that the Karachi airport has been mortgaged 5 times between the years 2013 to 2017 to take loans? Do we know that in June of last year, the Pakistan cabinet approved mortgaging of Pakistan television, Pakistan radio buildings to foreign debtors in order to get further loans? So what has been happening apart from everything else, and I'll quickly come to what they are headed to the IMF conditions. Since 2006, Pakistan got into the habit of mortgaging its assets, its toll roads, motorways. It started with that, you know, the Islamabad, Lahore, whichever motorways, etc. A portion mortgaged, a portion mortgaged. Then it got into the habit of mortgaging parts of Karachi airport. You know, in that period between 2012 to 2017, approximately $5 billion of loans have been taken by mortgaging shares and parts of the Karachi airport. So that's the habit. And by the way, in this June meeting last year, the Pakistan cabinet approved that the Karachi seaport, the Eastern Wharf and the Western Wharf could also be hypothecated for taking loans. That's all coming home to roost in a certain way. Now, going ahead, the unimaginable conditions that Shehbaz Sharif is saying, you know, apart from the taxes and the, you know, all of that, you know, where it's going to hurt Pakistan hugely. The Pakistani military runs the Fauji Foundation, we all know. They've got multiple an empire. Apparently about $26 billion annual revenues. No, they are tax exempt.
No, 1 minute. Do we know in a bit of more detail what these conditions are that the IMF is imposing?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. One of the conditions would be that the Fauji Foundation, the military foundations with about $26 billion of revenues annual, which are tax-free, would have to be taxed. You mentioned also about Sri Lanka. Look at what IMF has asked Sri Lanka. The deal with Sri Lanka is that Sri Lanka is going to reduce its military troops from 180,000 to 135,000 this exact year, and in the next 5 years or so come down to 100,000. Pakistan would have to reduce that. I'm just talking defense because that's really unimaginable for Pakistan. Pakistan would have to reduce its pensions. Pakistan's military budget that we know of does not include the military pensions since Musharraf's time. Since Musharraf's time, the pensions have been put into the civil expense category, not into the defense category. That would have to be brought into the defense category, and that whole number brought down. So these are the unimaginable conditions which Shehbaz Sharif is talking, from what I understand, other than raising taxes, raising tariffs, income tax. Sri Lanka, they've been asked to raise their personal income tax and corporate income tax to 30%. Similarly, more or less would come to Pakistan. So there are going to be these conditions on the civil side of things, but I think what's really worrying Pakistan when they say unimaginable are things wherein they will have to cut down their defense budgets for one. That is one. Second, the collaterals, which I'm talking like Karachi port. Another thing, selling off of public sector enterprises. Sri Lanka is going to privatize their national airline, Sri Lankan Airways or whatever, and the telecom. The profit-making ones have to be, put on the block, as well as the loss-making ones have to be totally sold off. So IMF is going to, and that's where Pakistan is heading, all its assets, many of its assets. And by the way, this is for the future. What happens to the lenders to whom some of these assets are already mortgaged?
Exactly.
That's going to be another story.
So yes. 1 minute.
Sure.
1 minute. So we're understanding this, and this is really the key point, that if part of the conditions, including that the IMF is going to impose include cutting off the gravy train for Pakistan's defense establishment. That is going to be difficult to push down the line and explain. Difficult to the defense regime, which is extremely powerful, as we know, in Pakistan. Difficult to explain to, the common people. Ambassador Suresh Goel, what do you see as the fallout for this? Are we going to see possibly another bout of political instability?
Clearly. Tamanna, I think basically what has happened in the case of Pakistan is that Pakistan has been complacent for the last more than 50 or 60 years, that it would be saved from any kind of economic fallout of its policies because it's an Islamic state. As an Islamic state, it has been part of support to many states in the region who have always banked upon an Islamic kind of a theosophy where Pakistan would be the centerpiece. Pakistan called the nuclear bomb that had exploded as an Islamic bomb, that Pakistan is providing an Islamic bomb. Please remember that OIC was actually a brainchild of Pakistan. So Pakistan has survived so far essentially on promoting an Islamic philosophy. And because of the Islamic philosophy, it has been bailed out in the past by many states in the region. Today, there is a change. The states in the region are not prepared to bail out Pakistan anymore, only because it's an Islamic state. And therefore, I think when we say the chicken coming home to roost, that is exactly what is happening in Pakistan. Economic mismanagement of the last 50 or 60 years is now coming to plague Pakistan. That is number one. Number two, Pakistan has now become actually a state now which is a mecca for the terrorist elements. Remember what happened near the mosque today in Peshawar. Pakistan is actually not encouraging, but Pakistan is now facing the consequences. So politically, since you asked me the question, politically, Pakistan will have to face up to all the mismanagement of the previous years. Whether it can actually escape it or not is a different question altogether. However, from my point of view, or from our point of view, do we want a Pakistan which is unstable? And my sense is that we do not want an unstable Pakistan on our border. An unstable Pakistan on our border is going to mean more refugees, more immigrants, more instability at our own borders, more problems in Punjab. Rajasthan may not remain unscathed. And therefore, we need to work out as to how, if our intervention can help Pakistan get the kind of loan, maybe Pakistan probably will not need the intervention. But the fact is that we do not want an unstable Pakistan at our border. At a political level, Pakistan will have to salvage its economy somehow, how it does it. And if we have to help in the process, I think we should. Tamanna.
Okay. Bharat Karnad, when I'm asking about political instability specifically for the Shehbaz Sharif government, which itself has not really been elected per se. It's come into power by toppling Imran Khan, who is still trying to regain his foothold politically. Then you have the role of the defense establishment. How do you see all of this playing out? And yes, your take too on the impact in the wider region and for India as well.
Let me start with the latter issue. The fact is that Pakistan is now the sixth man of South Asia. And we have to worry about it because there'll be fallout for all the countries joining Pakistan. Afghanistan, it can't go much worse for the situation is bad enough in Afghanistan. So that's not important. Iran has troubles of its own, but it manages its own problems. It is India that will have to face the bulk of the problems should Pakistan destabilize to the extent of disintegration. And that's quite possible. You are seeing on the TV screen sort of the beginnings of food riots, and so on. There'll be, who knows what's going to happen when the people get desperate for food, for basic amenities and so on. That'll be missing, or that'll go missing very soon because it's unaffordable. According to the IMF regimes, the higher tariffs will be imposed, etc., taxes imposed, the tax base widened, and so on. So there's enormous reason for discontent that's going to have real bad effects on that country. And there I would agree with Mr. Goel that we'll need to do something, even if we don't want to. The fact is, it's better to have a Pakistan that is still on its feet rather than one that is disintegrating. And remember, it's a nuclear weapon state. That is the real concern for most countries of the world. Should, God forbid, Taliban or more of some of the extremist elements, the Lashkar and the TTP, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan and so on, take over, then they'll come into control of the nuclear arsenal. Now, this is the kind of nightmare situation that many of us have been concerned about. Many of the governments all over the world have been concerned about for many, many years. And this might now be coming true. So we have to deal with that possibility.
Right.
And one of the ways to, in some way, secure for Pakistan its own nuclear arsenal would be to help that country stabilize itself economically. In domestic politic terms, I think this seems to be a zero-sum game. There's no inclination on the part of either the ruling party, the Shehbaz government, and this coalition along with the PPP to in some sense, reconcile the differences with the Imran Khan party. And that is the real nub of the issue. And we have a real problem.
Right.
Because if these parties, the domestic political, factions do not, in some sense, resolve their differences and do not put up as a united front vis-a-vis the IMF in some sense, in accepting all the conditions that are going to be imposed on Pakistan, you will have a situation where the next government coming in or the separate governments that are going to be elected in Northwest Frontier Province, which now Pakhtunkhwa and so on,
right,
they are going to disregard the conditions. What happens then?
No, so Mr. Karnal, if I may interject, that's exactly what my point was. It's not like Pakistan has a track record of following these conditions in the past. The IMF, as an SOP, doesn't give bailouts without conditions. And that's happened with all countries in the world. India had its moment, which led to, an economic renewal in 1991, pushed by the IMF conditions. So the point is that you have to actually follow those conditions, right? You can just take the money and then not follow them. What happens then?
Look, the fact is, this is the 24th IMF program that Pakistan is now facing, not the first. When we went into an IMF program, we escaped it by being very stringent and conservative in our expenditures and so on, and we brought everything under control. The Pakistanis are being bailed out by other countries. They are used to live on other people's monies. All the time that the Afghanistan war was on, Pakistan actually lived off the American largesse that was being funneled into fighting the Afghan war by the Americans. Royalties were being paid by the Americans for the use of their territory to transship equipments and gasoline, etc., to fight the war in Afghanistan and so on. So, they're used to not working for a living. They're used to just having some kind of, you might say, dole, living on dole. And now that the war is over in Afghanistan, they suddenly find that they cannot really tap the American sources. And because the Americans have distanced themselves, you find the Arabs not interested in bailing them out. The Chinese have always been too realistic.
Interesting today, the Shehbaz Sharif says that I will have to listen to these unimaginable conditions. Michael Kugelman, how do you see that panning out and the response of the defense mechanism if, as Ravinder Sachdev says, some of those conditions would be on cutting down the largesse that the defense establishment also enjoys?
Right, and certainly the defense sector would, or the army would put up a big fight, I would think, if indeed the Pakistan would be held to those conditions. But, important to remember here that if this government in power now had acted, 2-3 months ago to start taking these austerity measures, then Pakistan may not be in as serious a spot as it is now. I mean, things may have moved along more quickly with the IMF negotiations if Pakistan had shown a willingness to work with the IMF some time ago, which gets to my point earlier that the governance factor looms large here. But ultimately, my sense is that Pakistan will somehow come out of this avoiding a default. But I emphasize again that this does not mean that Pakistan is out of the woods. And if they do avoid default, there'll be all the celebratory rhetoric from the government in Pakistan. But it's not right. This would be, if Pakistan avoids default, it would be, as I've described it, a Pyrrhic victory. It's going to be in a whole lot of trouble. The structural problems that have been afflicting this economy for so long, as well as the broader elite capture problem, which is at the root of all of this, none of that's going to go away. None of that will have been solved. And given that this is happening against the backdrop of resurgent terrorism from the Pakistani Taliban, as we all know, as well as this political polarization that runs so deep in Pakistan now, I think that's what's worrisome. Not only would it come out of avoiding a default still mired in severe economic stress, but dealing with the security and stability concerns, the political volatility, it's just not a good combination, and certainly not in a country like Pakistan where you have these inherent volatilities to start with. So I think that the key thing at this point in the political context is to see what happens with the election. If the government decides to put off the election, which could well happen, they could cite the economy, they could cite the security situation. That's where I think we have to worry about political instability heating up even more, as Imran Khan, of course, would never accept that. You could see more protests and things could go from there. So I think for me, that's a key signpost moving forward, is what will the electoral calendar look like in Pakistan? Will the election still happen when it's supposed to happen in the fall?
Mr. Sachdev, I want your comment on something that Ambassador Goel said and Mr. Karnad also echoed on what India's role should be. Should we stand by and watch as Pakistan collapses economically, as it's likely to do? What really is our take in your view?
Fair enough. 2 points, one quick answer to your question, and then I have something to add. What I would say, let's think open sky. India could offer and say to Pakistan, come on guys, chill down. Honestly, reduce your defense expenditure, focus on your economy. We are not a threat to you. India could send some signal like that, as Ambassador or Bharat Karnad are saying, or something like that. So let them, allocate their monies towards the other real needs. We are not the threat that you think you are. So go along with the IMF package one. But coming back, IMF. See, IMF is just only a trigger. It will not help out at all. After this, Pakistan has to go to what is known as the Paris Club. Sri Lanka, you mentioned, still has not got the IMF money. Because IMF says that you go now and talk to all your bilateral creditors and figure a common deal with them about how much of their debt they will postpone and what maturity terms. Now, in Sri Lanka's case, India has said, okay, fine, India, Japan, China are the three main lenders, bilateral. We've said, okay, we'll go with what IMF Paris Club say. Japan says also. China says no. We are saying we are okay to a moratorium of 10 to 15 years of Sri Lankan debt. Japan agrees. China says, no, we want a moratorium only of 2 years.
Right.
So Pakistan will have to go the same route to the Paris Club IMF meetings, which is only the bilateral official creditors, and get them to a common understanding, okay, for how long would they hold a moratorium or whatever, right? Apart from that, the whole issue of the pledged assets I was talking, the BlackRocks and the Vanguard and the Fidelity Investments private equity, who have a chunk of the Karachi airport, they will not take a haircut. Countries take haircuts. Countries could. countries could be persuaded. But private investors, the Goldman Sachs of the world, they will not. They will say, okay, fine, you know what, because they have to answer to their investors. So it's going to be very much more complicated. One last point, IMF and the Paris Club in the last 10, 20 years, the way they could, even when India went, could restructure because the nature of the lenders was different. Right now, the lenders are a different composition. You have the Gulf countries, you have China. I mean, in this case, we don't have India, of course, right? So it will be difficult for Pakistan, even with IMF agreeing, okay, fine, 1 billion
So
is
correct.
nothing.
So IMF bailout is just the first step. They have a long way to go. Bharat Karnad, I'm interested in knowing your view on how you think the Pakistani military will respond. Will they continue to back Shehbaz Sharif if he has to take a tough stance?
Well, look, I think the Pakistan Army is really up a creek, as they say. It doesn't have. It really has to face the reality that the country has no money to upkeep the military establishment, which takes up more than 20% annually of the budget, and doesn't pay taxes, etc., for all kinds of foundations that the military has set up, industries it has set up. It is the largest producer of cement, sugar, God knows what other things, tires, and so on and so forth. It is so commercially rooted and so used to having the kind of advantages of state within a state that it suddenly realizes it cannot act in a sovereign manner anymore.
Right.
That it'll have to defer to the elected government in Islamabad, which in turn has to accept the conditions that the IMF is asking of Islamabad. So, the military will therefore have to tailor their requirements to what the country can afford.
So the military will have to suck it up. Basically, they'll have to. They will have to just deal with the situation if they want this kind of help. Very quickly, Ambassador Goel, because I'm actually out of time. How do you see this panning out over the next few weeks?
Very difficult. IMF has never really helped any country. In 1991, if we had to really oblige and we had to follow the conditions of IMF had no hope at all that we would be able to do so. But fortunately, we had a set of politicians who were sage and who managed it. Today, in the case of Pakistan, it's impossible, really.
Yeah.
The only good thing about Pakistan really is that Pakistan, the way it is geopolitically located, it holds a trump card as far as the USA is concerned, and that is Afghanistan.
Right.
US
Let's see if they can if they can encash that trump card again. I have to wrap it here, but I want to thank all of you for joining us in this discussion and putting into context why this is such an important story for our region. Of course, like I said, the big lesson from here is that you can continue to make wild promises as a politician, as a government, to keep getting votes or be popular, but at some point, someone has to pay the bill, and it's usually the poorest of the poor.